The first reading that we're going to do is Bob Gazda is going to read on his father, Walter Gazda. Bob, turn over to you.
There's a place in my father's house that I used to go to when I was bored. It was upstairs in the attic of our house at 27 Packers Falls Road. Upstairs there was a large, mysterious-looking, heavy white bag that used to hang from one of the exposed ceiling rafters. My dad finally satisfied my curiosity one day by showing me the contents within that bag. Inside were many colorful postcards of faraway places, names like Napoli, Gibraltar, Sicily, Tunisia, Panama. I used to look at these pictures and marvel at how it must have been like to see such interesting sights. Inside there were also colorful ribbons, some things he called leggings, a bunch of coins with strange-looking faces on them, and even a yellowish, silvery, fuzzy thing on a hook and line. He told me this was his old sea bag, and he used to have to carry it wherever he went when he was in the Navy. I guess I always will remember those days and how captivated I was by strange pictures of men half naked with sticks through their noses, carrying machetes and spears, for these are the earliest memories of my father's time in the service. It isn't full of heroic experiences of long marches through dense tropical jungles, though we saw his share of the jungles of New Guinea. It is just the story of a man who, like so many other Newmarket men and women, were called to the service of their country. It is the story of my dad, Walter A. Gazda. Walter A. Gazda was a lifelong resident of Newmarket, New Hampshire. He was born in Newmarket August 6, 1917, to Polish immigrants who, like many of their fellow Poles, came here to work in the mills and earn a better future for themselves and their families. Walter grew up here and attended school up until the 8th grade. Then he had to leave to help support the family of 7 by working on their small dairy farm. It was 1929. And the Depression was on. But Walter, or Jack, as his family and friends called him, never let the lack of formal education stand in his way of learning. He was clever, curious, and had a great desire to understand the how and why of things that moved. He was good with his hands and would take apart and fix clocks as a kid. When the country was cast into the war with Germany and World War II broke out, Walter was working as a machinist trainee at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft in East Hartford, Connecticut. He was called for induction into the Army on March 3, 1943, but by some method got himself enlisted into the Navy and reported for boot camp in Newport, Rhode Island, March 9, 1943. He completed basic training, or boot camp, as a member of Company 878, better known as Spanky's Fighting 78th. And this is a picture of Spanky's Fighting 78th. My father's there in the corner. It's probably the only picture I have of him actually in uniform, except for his wedding picture. It wouldn't be long until that colorful nickname would live up to its true meaning. Jack found himself qualified as an aerial gunner and assigned as a member of the Armed Guard. Navy personnel selected to serve with the Armed Guard had the great privilege of traveling to many different parts of the world, and usually in harm's way. They had the opportunity to travel the 7 seas on board Liberty ships, which were notoriously known as slow-moving targets and very unstable in bad weather. He would often remember how he would be seasick for 3 or 4 days on those ships, but it was his job to protect these ships from enemy attack whenever possible, and his daily routine of watch standing and shipboard duties would fill his days. Among the various deployments Jack was a part of, perhaps the worst was the dreaded Murmansk runs. These trips were usually large convoy style, and the U.S. government would send perhaps 100 Liberty ships northward up through the frigid waters of the North Atlantic to supply the Allied Russian troops. These convoys would have an air cover for the first 200 miles, then only a shadow cover by attached destroyers and other escorts from that point on. Sometimes they had no cover at all, none except for the onboard armed guard and their 3 or 5-inch guns. Not much protection from the German wolf packs known to prowl these waters. Murmansk was a port in the north of Russia in the Black Sea. Having completed at least 2 of these trips, Jack was then assigned to warmer waters. In January of 1944, he was on the Cape Nedic, a Liberty ship, and this time headed from New York through the Panama Canal to the South Pacific Theater. Stops were made in Buna, New Guinea, in the South Pacific Islands, and finally arriving in Sydney, Australia, March 11, 1944. Sydney was a fine place to spend 4 days, unloading and loading cargo. He often talked about Sydney. It was such a nice place and such a different atmosphere than his other places he had been to. Brought back a pennant, actually, with a bridge of the Sydney Bridge on it. We still have it. It was a welcome change to the long, dreary days spent at sea and in the steamy jungle climates of New Guinea and the New Hebrides. They finally arrived back in San Francisco in April of '44. This information I got from a diary he kept. And these diaries weren't supposed to be kept, but he had a little book, and I found it, and it's got all its dates in it. On April 22nd, July 4th, 1944, bound for the Pacific again, stops were made at Christmas Island, Millennium Bay, New Guinea, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, New Hebrides Islands, and the New Hebrides Islands. My dad was never in port for very long. His naval service took him to both theaters of the war, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Jack was honorably discharged from the service on October 25th, 1945, and returned to civilian life. He married the gal he had met while a machinist trainee at Pratt & Whitney. My mom would often say he was so shy, his buddy had to give him the idea to offer him a stick of gum. Dad often wrote his sweetheart while away in the Navy. Jack attended watchmaker school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and while living there with his wife and commuting daily. He had 4 children. He returned to Newmarket in 1948 and operated a small watch repair and jewelry shop on Main Street from 1948 to 1957. He moved his business to his residence on Packers Falls Road in 1957 and had a thriving, respected watch, clock, and jewelry repair business up until his death in 1984. It was just one of the many men from Newmarket who answered the call to serve his country. He was my dad. Thank you.